Welcome back, MMA fans. I'm Ray Garvey Jr. This is episode 3 of the MMA News. Today we're going to be talking about Alex Pereira dismantling Yuri Persa, other things that went down at UFC 303, Karate Combat 47 in Orlando, Florida, and on tonight's Mount Rushmore, we're going to talk about folks who not only served within the octagon, but served our country as well, right after our intro.
UFC 303 this past weekend, Ian Garry defeated michaelvenompage. What's next for these fighters, Ray?
I tell you what, Ian Garry was able to get past an ever dangerous, ever accomplished Michaelvenompage, and what I thought was going to be a battle for the ages in striking. Ian Garry, although he didn't win any fans, he played it smart. He rode MVP like a backpack, 8 minutes of ground control. The fight was decidedly won by Ian Garry. God knows what's going to be next for Michaelvenompage, but I will tell you right now, the ever-popular, amazing guy at trash talking, Colby Covington, is currently without a dance partner. These two have already had words in public, and I tell you what, Ian Garry versus Colby Covington is going to be a big enough fight to co-headline any UFC pay-per-view this late summer, this early fall. So if you're asking me my opinion, I think we're going to see Ian Garry taking on Colby Covington in what can be considered a title fight eliminator. And for MVP, I really don't know what's next for him, and I don't know what he has left to prove. I wish him the best of luck in his next venture inside the octagon.
And Ige steps up for Brian T-City Ortega to fight Diego Lopez. Diego Lopez walks away with the win. What's next for Diego Lopez?
I tell you what, Diego Lopez showed us everything that he has in the tank. He put on a great offensive submission game in the first round. He was able to dismantle Dan Ige on the feet, a couple of holes being exploited, but I think this was a win-win for the likes of Diego Lopez. What I think is going to take place next is that I don't want to see a number 12 fighter take on a number 3 fighter. Josh Emmett, who recently dismantled Bryce Mitchell, absolutely devastating knockout, contender for knockout of the year, is currently without a dance partner. I want to see Diego Lopez take on the number 7th ranked Josh Emmett, and that will put him in line for a top 5 fight next.
All right, and then in the main event, Alex Pereira knocks out Yuri Persa. What's next for Yuri, Ray?
I tell you what, the main event of UFC 303 did not disappoint. Alex Pereira put another stamp on his credentials and application to the UFC greatest 205-pound champions of all time, ending the fight via vicious head kick early on in the second round over the incredibly athletic and dangerous Yuri Persa. It went down exactly the way that I thought it would. I didn't think Yuri was dynamic enough. I didn't think he had the lateral movement to give Alex Pereira a legitimate challenge. But what's next for Yuri? Jamal Hill, who also recently lost to the hands of Alex Pereira in a relatively lopsided fashion, is currently without a tango partner. So I'm going to think that Yuri is going to take on Jamal Hill in what is going to set up either a title eliminator fight or perhaps fight for what's going to be vacated 205-pound gold, which I'll tackle next.
All right, what's next for Alex Pereira?
Alex Pereira put another stamp on his application for greatest 205-pound champions of all time. What's next for Alex? I don't think there's much left for him in the 205-pound weight class. I don't think that Ankalaev has the name and the star power to give Poatan the payday that he deserves after everything he's given to the UFC since coming over here to basically just give a dance partner to Izzy Adesanya. Nobody expected this guy to do much of anything, and now I think that he's going to make his way to the heavyweight division. We've got Tom Aspinall taking on Curtisblaydes at the end of this month. Right now, cyrilgane, a heavyweight dynamic striker, is without a partner. I want to see Alex Pereira, possibly this September, October, take on cyrilgane. The winner of that, I want to see run it because if John Jones doesn't get his shit together, that's going to be the title eliminator fight. So look for either cyrilgane or Alex Pereira to take on the winner of Tom Aspinall versus Curtisblaydes for UFC heavyweight gold, possibly early next spring.
All right, PFL ended their regular season this past weekend. Coming back in August, they will have their playoffs. Who are you excited to see in this season of playoffs, Ray?
Well, I tell you what, playoff appearance or not, I want to give the credit that is due to Lorenz Larkin. The guy had an amazing long-term tenured career in the UFC. He was able to get past Dominguez via a first-round knockout this past weekend, a guy who has been giving to the sport for the better part of over a decade. And talking about the playoffs, I'm going to jump into, we're going to take it out of the men's division and into the women's. I'm going to mention Liz Carmouche. Those of you who remember, she was the first inaugural female fight within the UFC. She lost via armbar to Ronda Rousey, but not after almost finishing her via neck crank early in the first round, going on 13 years ago. Liz Carmouche then went on to have a very underappreciated but very accomplished career. She won gold in Bellator, having a way to 4 title defenses. When PFL purchased Bellator, she says, look, I have no interest in becoming the lineal champ. She wants a crack at that million. I want to see Liz Carmouche get the payday she deserves after giving so much to the sport for the better part of over a decade.
All right, she's our inspiration for our segment this week. It is Mount Rushmore.
So this weekend, we're going to celebrate independence that we earned from England. So by the way, Michael Bisping and Paddy Pimblett, congrats on second place back in 1776, fellas. We're going to talk about UFC fighters who not only served in the octagon, but served our country as well. We just talked about Liz Carmouche. Not only was she the first woman fighter in the UFC, the first openly gay fighter within the UFC, this woman served for 5 years with 3 deployments for our very own United States Marine Corps. Let's give it up to Liz Carmouche. On the back of Liz Carmouche, much like a Lorenz Larkin, much like a James Vick, who we're going to talk about later, a name that true fans are going to know, Neil Magny served 7 years in the Army National Guard. He deployed to Kuwait. So before he was making a name for himself in the UFC, he wasn't coaching part-time. He wasn't partying on the weekends. He spent 7 years of his life dedicated to serving our country. So Neil Magny, thanks for what you gave to us in the octagon, and thanks for fighting for our freedom, pal. Happy July 4th. I wish you the best. Next one's going to be, we're going to reach back into a hat from yesteryear, and we are going to bring a name that is just going to make Dana White absolutely cringe. We are going to give the credit to Randy the Natural Couture that he deserves. He spent 6 years in the United States Army, leaving as a sergeant. This man got out in his mid-20s, went on then to have an incredibly decorated college wrestling career in Oklahoma, making his way to become a UFC rookie in his mid-30s, hoisting gold in his 40s, the only guy to ever hold a victory notch in his belt over the likes of Father Time. Randy Couture, the Natural, not only serving fighters, not only serving the community, serving our country back in the early to mid-80s before 95% of the UFC roster was even born. Randy, happy July 4th, pal. Saving what was probably going to be considered the best for last when it comes to the absolute credentials as a soldier, no list would be complete without mentioning Tim Kennedy. This man was a U.S. Army Ranger, member of the 7th Special Forces Division. This guy was a sniper instructor, combatives instructor, served multiple tours overseas, became a contractor afterwards, and guess what? When he made his way to compete this close to UFC Gold, this wasn't in the wake or aftermath of a U.S. military career. Tim Kennedy managed to fight Yoel Romero while being an active duty U.S. Army Ranger. I don't know what kind of a psycho of a man has the ambition, the conviction, and the energy to do so, but Tim Kennedy, as Brian Callen once said, we need to put you in a glass case and say, in case of emergency, break, and release Tim on the world. Tim, thank you for everything you've given to the sport. You're an incredible advocate for the Second Amendment community. Happy July 4th this weekend, brother. In the Don seat, because I don't necessarily think that his contributions are just for his service or just as a fighter, I want to take a moment to give credit to someone who's given so much to not just MMA and football and our veterans. We're going to talk about Captain Brian Stann. This man, who is the WEC light heavyweight champion of the world, made his way over to the UFC, beating Alessio Sakara, losing to the hands of Wanderlei Silva, doing so with class and dignity. But guess what? Before he made his way to the octagon, he graduated from Annapolis, the Naval Academy, became a captain in the Marine Corps, winning the Silver Star in the Middle East. I tell you what, it doesn't end there. This man goes on to have a decorated military career, hoist gold in the WEC, becomes an incredible name in the UFC, full-time commentator over in the ACC doing college football, and then he finds the time to start the Hire Heroes Foundation. And we're going to segue from that Mount Rushmore of those who serve the country into the good Lord's work, a segment where we talk about fighters who give to their community as a whole. Brian Stann not only fought for our freedom, winning a Silver Star, graduating from Annapolis, fighting for the UFC, holding WEC 205-pound gold, great, all well. When he sits in the autumn and winter of life and looks back on his career, his contributions to society as a whole, Brian Stann took the time out of his life to start the Hire Heroes Foundation. They were able to help 17,000 displaced and underappreciated veterans find stability in life and in employment. This guy has done nothing but be a consummate giver to his community. If you want to run it back and take a look at what happened against him and the likes of Alessio Sakara, Brian Stann would never hit a downed opponent. Guys and gentlemen, inside the octagon and out, the sport is better for having him as a member of it, and I hope someday he comes back to commentate. Brian Stann, happy July 4th, sir.
All right, next UFC event is UFC Denver on July 13th, originally scheduled for Rose Namajunas and Macy Barber. Macy Barber fallen ill, had to pull out. Very unfortunate situation, as she was going to have the opportunity to fight a past champion in her hometown. But the question is, with Tracy Cortez stepping up to fight Rose Namajunas, Ray, is Rose going to have a chance at a flyweight gold belt, or is she going to be a good gatekeeper for this division?
First thing I want to tackle is right now, Macy Barber, who is on an unbelievable tear in the UFC, was recently diagnosed with Epstein-Barr syndrome. We here at the MMA News wish you a speedy recovery, Macy. You still have a lot to give to the sport. Let me tackle the question, is Rose going to be a gatekeeper? I tell you what, any UFC champion who loses the belt seldom, if ever, has the opportunity, much less the conviction, to grab it back. Rose has been champion not once, but twice. So has she become a gatekeeper? I'm going to say yes, but for a different reason. I think that Rose's best years are behind her. I think that she has elevated the competition, much like Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So Rose is probably not going to get past the likes of a Tracy Cortez, but I do think she still has the name power to have some incredible paydays with the UFC. I look for her to be competitive, but is she going to sniff out UFC gold? Probably not. Do I wish she would? Absolutely. Rose, we here at the MMA News are big fans. Thank you for everything you've given to the sport.
Okay, and a fight announced for the UFC 304 card at the end of July, on July 27th. We'll have Bobby Green versus Paddy Pimblett. Is Bobby Green too tough of a gatekeeper for the young Paddy Pimblett, Ray?
Well, I tell you what, anytime anybody attaches the name gatekeeper to Bobby Green has a tendency to prove them wrong. Paddy Pimblett, much like a Sage Northcutt or a Paige Van Zandt, was a hype train. Dana White was banking on this kid to bring home the bacon for the UFC. Paddy, unfortunately, past his submissions, has been shown to be a less than dynamic striker. Speed, probably not quite at the elite level. This is not a great matchup for Paddy Pimblett. I'm not going to be surprised if Bobby's going to be able to walk in there, stand him up tall, take away the takeaways from Paddy Pimblett. We here at the MMA News are going to root for Bobby Green. He goes all the way back to the Josh Thompson's days, truly an MMA pioneer. At 37 years young, look for Bobby Green to get past the likes of a Paddy Pimblett, derailing the hype train once and for all.
All right, this past weekend we had Karate Combat 47. There was a massive knockout and even a submission. Also, this weekend coming up, we have Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz in a very stacked card. Tell us about it, Ray.
All right, I'm beginning to love the That's Not MMA segment. This weekend, an organization of which I'm becoming a big fan, Karate Combat 47 took place in front of a sold-out arena in Universal Studios, Orlando, Florida. The UFC popular veteran James Vick was knocked out in incredible fashion via switch kick to the head by the relatively unknown yet overpowerful Rafael Alves. Right now, in what went from one of the greatest moments that Karate Combat could possibly hope for, absolutely celebratory moment. It's going to be in the highlight reel. The auditorium quickly fell deathly silent as James Vick was not moving. It appeared as though he had a seizure. Next thing you know, he's being carted off an ambulance. We later went on to find out that he was intubated to assist with his breathing. We here at the MMA News wish a speedy recovery to James Vick. And also, we want to congratulate Rafael on an absolute all-time great knockout. Probably going to make himself a regular position in the highlight reel for Karate Combat events to come. So hats off to you. We're going to slide off right next into the first submission victory in the history of Karate Combat. Even the most hardcore fans are probably going to not know the names because neither of them were actually on the fight card, Bill. The president, a.k.a. President Awesome, Asaim Zaidi, finished an overzealous, ego-driven cornerman in front of a Sam Alvey, for some reason wearing board shorts and a cowboy hat, via standing rear naked choke. Can you imagine Dana White putting Nate Diaz on his back, finishing him via omoplata? I can't, but I tell you what, this guy was... It's not a good look for MMA anytime the corner's clear, anytime we show them the more savage side. But I tell you what, President, I had no idea who you were before this past weekend, but you earned a fan, and I hope that Joe Rogan talks about it on the next MMA show because that was a submission of the week for us here at the MMA News. Let's go, President Awesome!
Last but not least on the That's Not MMA segment, we have Jorge Masvidal fighting Nate Diaz this weekend with a stacked card. What do you see going on there, Ray?
Everybody, this coming Saturday, July 6th, Nate Diaz, the West Coast gangster, is going to be taking on Jorge Gamebred Masvidal. We talked about it last week. I'm going to say it again right now. Jorge hasn't looked incredibly motivated in his last few fights, but I still think that he has enough in the tank to get past the likes of Nate Diaz, whose best career took place at 155 pounds. Jorge having a better run at 170 than did Nate. I tell you what, I said it last time, this fight has no implications in MMA or in boxing, but I'm here for it. I want to see both of these guys put on an absolute incredible show. Hopefully one of them gets a crack at the winner versus Mike Perry and Jake Paul, because I don't think Mike Tyson's ever going to make his way to the ring against the likes of a Jake Paul. So I tell you what, Jorge this weekend, hold it down for the 305. Nate Diaz, I tell you what, if nothing else, smack him for the city of Stockton. Let's go, boys! That was episode 3 of the MMA News. I want to give a special tip of my cap to all those who served our country. Brian Stann, Liz Carmouche, Randy Couture, Neil Magny, and Tim Kennedy, including countless others. Alex Pereira, we salute you. You are absolutely one of the greatest 205-pound combat athletes the sport has ever seen. Jorge hold it down this weekend. And I tell you what, if you haven't checked out Karate Combat yet, I hope that you do. And don't forget to look for the president to finish his next fight via submission on his back. So for that, I'm Ray Garvey Jr. This was episode 3 of the MMA News. Don't forget to hit the like. Don't forget to subscribe for all notifications so you don't miss future content. Help me get in the algorithm. I love talking about the sport. You love hearing about it. We'll see you next time.